Blazing studio lights cut through the air like spotlights in a gladiator arena, casting a sharp glow on Alexandra Rhodes, the fiercest, most unapologetic liberal host on television. She sat behind her sleek glass desk, her smirk loaded like a weapon, ready to fire. The audience pulsed with restless energy, half eager to watch her destroy her guest, half wondering if tonight would be the night she finally met her match. And then, the music swelled. The doors opened. Donald Trump was in the building. And then, the doors parted. Before we get into the details, let me know in the comments where you're watching this video from. Donald Trump strode onto the stage with the confidence of a man who had walked through fire and come out untouched. The applause was mixed. Cheers and scattered boos blended into a chaotic energy, but if it bothered him, he didn't show it. He waved to the crowd, flashing that signature grin that had baffled and infuriated the media for years. Alexandra didn't rise to shake his hand. Instead, she folded her arms, waiting as he took his seat. "Well," she began, her voice oozing with condescension, "I never thought I'd see the day. Donald Trump, on my show. I have to ask, did you take a wrong turn on the way to Mar-a-Lago?" Laughter rippled through the audience. Trump leaned back, adjusting his suit with practiced ease. No. I figured someone had to come on here and speak the truth. Thought I'd you a favor." The laughter shifted, some chuckled, others murmured. Alexandra's eyes glinted. She was ready for a fight. "Well, let's start with something the whole country wants to know. Your wife, Melania. She's been, let's say, quiet lately. Some say distant. There are rumors, lots of rumors. People are wondering, does she even like you?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Trump didn't blink. He didn't flinch. Instead, he gave a slow nod, as if considering her words carefully. And then, with a voice as steady as ever, he spoke. "You know, Alexandra, I get it. You folks in the media, especially on the left, you have to make up stories because, let's be honest, the truth doesn't sell as well." He turned to the audience. "Am I right?" Scattered cheers erupted, but Alexandra pushed forward. "You didn't answer the question, Mr. Trump. Does your wife actually like you?" Trump leaned in slightly, dropping his voice just enough to make the moment feel personal. "Melania is one of the smartest, most graceful women I've ever known," he said, his tone unwavering. "She's elegant, strong, and, unlike some people, she doesn't need to scream for attention. That's called class." The audience shifted. A few murmurs of agreement rumbled through the room. Alexandra's smirk faltered for just a second. "But," she pressed, "there have been reports that she—" "Reports?" Trump interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "Oh, you mean the ones from anonymous sources? The ones from people who've never met her? The same media that told us I was working for Russia? The same people who swore the economy would crash the second I left office? Those reports." The audience chuckled. Alexandra's jaw tensed. She wasn't losing control of the conversation. Not yet. Okay, she said, flipping through her notes. "Let's move on. You talk about Melania's class, but a lot of people say she's nothing more than an accessory. A first lady who did the bare minimum. Compare her to Michelle Obama." Trump's head tilted slightly, as if he almost pitied her. "Michelle's great," he said. "She really is. But let's not forget, my wife speaks 5 languages. She came to this country legally, worked hard, and became a successful businesswoman before she ever met me. She didn't need a political machine to prop her up. She built herself." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Even a few of Alexandra's most loyal fans looked intrigued. "And you know what else?" Trump continued. "She didn't waste time complaining about how hard it was to be First Lady. She didn't go on book tours talking about how unfair life was. She did her job. With dignity. With grace." The crowd erupted. Alexandra's smirk disappeared entirely. She needed to turn the tide. And fast. "Well," she snapped, "if she's so happy, why does she seem so absent? We don't see her at rallies. We don't hear her defending you. What kind of supportive wife disappears when her husband is in trouble?" The room held its breath. Trump's expression remained unchanged. He simply exhaled and smiled. You see, Alexandra, that's the difference between you and Melania, he said, shaking his head. You think love is measured in tweets, interviews, and staged appearances. But real love is knowing someone has your back, even when they're not in front of a camera. The room was still. Trump turned to the audience. I don't need Melania standing next to me at every event to know she's with me, he said. I don't need her posting selfies to prove our marriage is strong. That's the thing about people with real relationships, Alexandra. We don't have to prove anything to anyone. The crowd erupted. A standing ovation. Alexandra looked like she had swallowed a lemon. She scrambled, flipping through her notes. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. And then, in a last-ditch effort, she decided to go for the kill. Final question, Mr. Trump, she said, her voice sharp. Would you be surprised if Melania left you? If, tomorrow, she filed for divorce? Gasps filled the studio. Trump let the moment hang in the air. Then he grinned. Would you be surprised, he countered, if this show got canceled after people realized how fake it is? Laughter exploded from the audience. Alexandra's mouth fell open, but Trump wasn't finished. Listen, I know you and your friends in the media dream of that headline. Melania leaves Trump. It keeps you up at night, doesn't it? Because you just can't stand the fact that a strong, independent woman actually loves me. He leaned in. Drives you crazy, huh? The crowd was on its feet. Alexandra was out of ammo. The cameras zoomed in on her face, stunned, speechless, defeated. Trump adjusted his tie, stood up, and looked into the camera. America, he said, flashing that familiar grin. This is why nobody trusts the media. He turned, waved to the audience, and strolled off stage, leaving Alexandra drowning in the mess she had created. As the credits rolled, the producers scrambled to cut the feed. But it was too late. By morning, the clip would be everywhere. And just like that, Donald Trump had won again. Backstage, the chaos was immediate. Producers shouted into headsets. Assistants ran in different directions, desperately trying to salvage what was left of the show. Alexandra sat frozen at her desk, her hands gripping the edges, so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had never been humiliated like this before. A crew member hesitantly approached. Ms. Rhodes? We're still live for another minute. Do you? Cut the feed, she snapped, her voice a razor blade. The screen went black. But it was too late. The internet had already exploded. Within minutes, clips of Trump's takedown flooded social media. The hashtags #TrumpOwnsTheMedia and #MelaniaSpeaksWithoutSpeaking skyrocketed to the top of trending lists. Even networks that despised him had no choice but to air the segment. The clip was everywhere: TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. Even late-night talk shows that usually mocked him were forced to admit Trump had walked into enemy territory and left unscathed. In the war of public opinion, he had just landed a nuclear strike. Meanwhile, in the green room, Trump lounged on a leather couch, scrolling through his phone. His longtime aide, Jason, was barely containing his laughter. Sir, Jason managed between chuckles, you just ended her career. She's trending for all the wrong reasons. Trump smirked. She walked into that one. He tapped his screen. Look at this. Even people who hate me are saying she embarrassed herself. I mean, I almost feel bad. Almost. Just then, a nervous intern peeked through the door. Mr. Trump? Ms. Rhodes would like to speak with you. Jason raised an eyebrow. That's unexpected. Trump didn't even look up from his phone. Tell her I'm busy. The intern swallowed. She says it's important. Trump sighed, slid his phone into his pocket, and stood up.
Fine.
Let's see what she has to say. He followed the intern down the hallway, past frantic producers and shell-shocked staffers. When they reached Alexandra's private office, the door was already open. She was standing by the window, arms crossed, staring at the city skyline. For the first time that evening, she looked rattled. Trump walked in, casually shutting the door behind him. So, he said, what's on your mind, Alexandra? Need advice on how to keep a job. She turned, her jaw tight. You think this is funny? He shrugged. A little. She exhaled sharply, then paced. I just got a call from the network, she admitted. They're furious. They said I lost control of the interview. That I let you make me look like an idiot. Trump smirked. They're not wrong. She shot him a glare. Listen, I know you think you won tonight. And maybe you did. But I want to know one thing. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Why didn't Melania defend you? Why doesn't she ever come out swinging like you do? Trump's smirk faded. For the first time, Alexandra saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Not anger. Not arrogance. Something deeper. She doesn't need to, he said simply. She knows who I am. She knows what we have. That's all that matters. Alexandra studied him for a moment, searching for weakness. But there was none. She had spent her career tearing people apart, exposing their cracks, forcing them into moments of doubt. But Trump? He was different. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't acting. He believed every word he said. And that scared her, because it meant he was untouchable. She swallowed hard, then looked away. You should go, she muttered. Trump didn't move. You know, he said, I actually used to respect you. Thought you were tough. Smart. He shook his head. But tonight? You weren't even in the same league. With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Alexandra alone in the dimly lit office. The next morning, the fallout was worse than she could have imagined. Major sponsors were pulling ads from her show. Executives were reevaluating her position. And worst of all, her biggest critics weren't Trump supporters. They were her own viewers. Liberal commentators called her weak. Feminist columnists accused her of failing to stand up to Trump. The headlines were brutal. Alexandra Rhodes crumbles under Trump's presence. Liberal media's biggest star just became its biggest joke. By noon, the network released a statement. We are reviewing last night's interview and will be making programming adjustments in the coming days. Programming adjustments. Alexandra knew what that meant. She was done. Her phone rang. She didn't have to look at the screen to know who it was. With a shaky hand, she answered. Yes. Her boss's voice was cold. Pack your things. And just like that, her career was over. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, Trump was at Mar-a-Lago, enjoying breakfast with Melania. She sipped her tea gracefully, flipping through the morning headlines. She glanced at her husband. So, she said in her soft, accented voice, did you have fun last night? Trump grinned, biting into a piece of toast. Oh, it was fantastic. You should have seen her face when Melania set her teacup down. I did see it. He raised an eyebrow. She turned her phone toward him. It was a video of the interview, one of the many clips circulating online. She tapped the screen. The video played, reaching the moment where Trump told Alexandra, real love is knowing someone has your back, even when they're not in front of a camera. Melania paused the video and looked at him. I like that part, she said. Trump chuckled. Yeah. She smiled. Yes. Then, without another word, she reached across the table and took his hand. Trump, for once, said nothing. Because in that moment, he didn't need to. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within hours of the interview, social media had exploded. The mainstream media scrambled to spin the narrative, but it was impossible to ignore the reality. Donald Trump had walked into the lion's den and emerged untouched, while Alexandra Rhodes, once the queen of hard-hitting interviews, had crumbled in front of millions. Her own audience turned on her. Liberal commentators called her weak. Network executives fumed over how easily she had lost control of the conversation. Major sponsors quietly pulled back, and by the next morning, whispers of a programming shakeup at Newsline Tonight became official. Alexandra Rhodes was out. For the first time in over a decade, she was unemployed. She locked herself inside her Manhattan apartment, avoiding calls from journalists, friends, and even former colleagues. Her inbox filled with interview requests from rival networks, all wanting to hear her side of the story. Some wanted an apology, others a bitter tell-all about how Trump had manipulated the conversation. She ignored them all. But as the days passed, one thought consumed her. Trump had won. And that was unacceptable. Late one evening, as she scrolled through the endless clips of her humiliation online, she made a decision. There would be no apology, no pity tour on morning television. If she was going to recover, she had to do it her way. She picked up her phone and sent a message. A simple request. Trump responded immediately. 2 days later, he arrived in New York. They met at a discreet, high-end restaurant, a place chosen carefully to avoid cameras and unwanted attention. He walked in alone, without an entourage, without a press team, looking every bit as confident as he had the night of the interview. Alexandra had been expecting arrogance, gloating, maybe even condescension. But instead, he sat down, as if nothing had happened at all. There was no need for pleasantries. Both knew why they were there. She had spent her entire career trying to expose men like him, but the truth was, she had never encountered anyone quite like him before. He wasn't shaken, wasn't bitter, didn't carry grudges the way so many politicians did. He had already moved on. The night that destroyed her career was just another win for him. That was why she had reached out. She wasn't here to ask for sympathy. She wasn't here to justify her failure. She was here to join the winning side. Trump listened as she made her case. There was no begging, no desperation in her voice. She was as sharp as ever, but this time, she had something new: humility. She had learned the hard way that fighting him was a losing battle. If she wanted a future in this game, she had to play by different rules. The conversation lasted over an hour. By the time they left, nothing had been signed, no official agreements had been made. But the shift had already happened. 2 weeks later, Alexandra Rhodes returned to television, not as an adversary of Trump, but as an unexpected ally. The media world was stunned. Headlines speculated wildly about what had changed. Critics called her a sellout. Former colleagues labeled her a traitor. She didn't care. She had spent her career tearing people down. Now she was about to rebuild something new. And this time, she wasn't betting against Trump. She was betting on him. The media world struggled to process Alexandra Rhodes' transformation. Just weeks earlier, she had been one of Trump's most aggressive critics, the liberal media's sharpest weapon against him. Now, she was sitting on political panels defending his policies, fact-checking his opponents, and dismantling the very narratives she had once championed. Her former colleagues at Newsline Tonight treated her like a ghost. Invitations to left-leaning talk shows stopped coming. Editorials denounced her as a sellout, a fraud, a woman who had traded integrity for survival. But she didn't flinch. She knew exactly what she was doing. The real shift wasn't just in her words, but in how people reacted to her. Conservative outlets that had once mocked her now welcomed her insights. Moderates found her perspective refreshing, someone from the inside, finally admitting what they had long suspected about the media. And the most surprising part? The Trump base, which had despised her for years, was starting to accept her. Not all of them, of course. There was skepticism. Some believed she was playing a long game, infiltrating their ranks to undermine them from within. But as weeks turned into months, Alexandra proved that she wasn't just adapting, she was thriving. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about winning. And she was winning in ways that few could have predicted. At Mar-a-Lago, Trump followed the developments with amusement. Jason, his longtime aide, sat across from him, scrolling through the latest headlines. Rhodes reinvented, he read aloud. Former liberal attack dog, now a conservative star. He smirked. Some of these people are really buying it. Trump leaned back in his chair, sipping his Diet Coke. Of course they are. Because she's good. Jason raised an eyebrow. Good or dangerous? Trump smirked. Both. He had dealt with plenty of people like Alexandra before, opportunists, careerists, people who saw politics as nothing more than a game of survival. But she was different. She hadn't just pivoted, she had dismantled her old world and stepped into a new one with full commitment. And that made her valuable. Or, depending on how things played out, a potential threat. Alexandra's rise in conservative media was meteoric. She secured guest spots on major networks, then landed her own show, one that positioned her as a former insider, exposing media corruption. Her ratings soared. People wanted to hear what she had to say. But power in this world was fragile, and Alexandra knew it. She had traded one battlefield for another. The enemies had changed, but the rules remained the same. Stay relevant, stay sharp, and never let anyone see you bleed. Some in Trump's circle still didn't trust her. They watched her closely, waiting for her to slip, to reveal some hidden agenda. But she never did. If she had a plan beyond survival, she kept it locked away. The only person who seemed to truly understand her was Trump himself. They spoke often, sometimes about politics, sometimes about the media, and sometimes about nothing at all. It was an unspoken arrangement. She had proven herself, for now. But trust was never absolute. Then, one evening, she received a message. A simple request.
Mar-a-Lago.
Tonight.
No explanation.
No details. She knew better than to ask. She packed her bag and left for Florida. The estate was quiet when she arrived. The usual crowd of guests and advisors was absent. A staffer led her to the private lounge. Inside, Trump was already waiting, sitting behind a desk, flipping through a stack of papers. He gestured for her to sit. No small talk.
No plaisanteries.
Then, he slid a folder across the desk toward her. Inside was a contract. It wasn't a job offer. It wasn't an endorsement deal. It was something bigger. A role that would put her not just inside the movement, but at the center of it. Trump had tested her. He had watched her. And now, he was ready to bring her into his inner circle. But there was a catch. Once she signed, there would be no going back. She would be tied to him in ways she never had been before. Her career, her influence, her future, it would all be tied to his success. She stared at the document for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, she picked up the pen.
And signed.
Alexandra Rhodes had made her choice. She was no longer a journalist. No longer an outsider. She was part of the machine now. And she was ready to play the game at the highest level, whatever it took. Months passed, and Alexandra Rhodes became more than just a media figure. She became a movement. Once the face of liberal journalism, she now commanded a growing army of disillusioned viewers, moderates, and conservatives who saw her as something new. She was sharper than the traditional right-wing voices, more ruthless than the establishment politicians, and more strategic than anyone had expected. Inside Trump's circle, the tension was undeniable. Some whispered that she was positioning herself as his successor. Others believed she was waiting for the right moment to seize control. And Trump? He watched. He listened. He measured every move she made. Because he knew better than anyone, power doesn't get shared. The night of the campaign gala was thick with anticipation. Trump entered first, moving through the crowd like a force of nature. Every handshake, every glance, every smirk reminded them all who was still in charge. Then, Alexandra arrived. She didn't walk in. She arrived, commanding attention without asking for it. The room shifted. People who had been clinging to Trump's orbit now watched her just as closely. For the first time, two giants of the movement stood in the same space, each carrying a different kind of power. And they both knew it. Later that evening, away from the flashing cameras, Trump stood alone on a private balcony, looking out at the city lights. He wasn't a man easily rattled. He had faced world leaders, media tycoons, and political backstabbers. But this was different. Behind him, the door opened. He didn't turn. He already knew who it was. Alexandra stepped beside him, mirroring his stance, both of them watching the skyline in silence. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, finally, Trump broke the quiet. "You did good tonight," he said, his voice steady, unreadable. Alexandra smirked. "So did you." Another pause. Then, without looking at her, Trump added, "I built this." She turned slightly, studying him. "I know," she said. A breeze passed between them, carrying the weight of what was left unsaid. Trump finally turned to face her, eyes sharp, calculating. "Are you here to take it?" She met his gaze without hesitation. "I'm here to win," she said. For the first time that night, Trump smiled. Not his usual smirk, not the grin he gave for cameras, but something more dangerous. "Good," he said, stepping past her. Let's see if you can. And with that, he was gone. Alexandra stayed, watching the city below. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. Have you ever been embarrassed in public? And what have you done to prevent this from happening again? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss if this story resonated with you. Support the channel, like, subscribe, and click the bell to not miss new releases. Let's talk together about things that really matter.